The Smith family lived in a small, cozy house at the edge of town, surrounded by thick woods and a quiet, winding road. They had a dog named Buddy, a golden retriever with a shiny coat and a playful, gentle nature. Buddy had been with the Smiths since he was a puppy, growing up alongside their two children, Emily and Jake. He was more than just a pet, he was a member of the family. Every morning, Buddy would greet each family member with a wagging tail and a lick on the cheek. He loved running around in the backyard, chasing squirrels and fetching sticks that Jake would throw for him. In the evenings, Buddy would curl up at their feet while they watched TV or read stories. His presence brought warmth and joy to their home, and the Smiths couldn't imagine life without him. One summer afternoon, Buddy ran off into the woods chasing a rabbit. This was nothing unusual, as he loved to explore, but when the sun began to set and Buddy still hadn't returned, the family grew worried. They called out his name, whistled, and shook his favorite toy, but Buddy didn't come back. The whole neighborhood joined in the search, combing through the woods and nearby streets, but there was no sign of Buddy. Days turned into weeks, and despite their best efforts, Buddy remained missing. The Smiths were devastated. Emily cried herself to sleep every night, and Jake became quiet and withdrawn. Even the parents, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who tried to stay strong for their children, found it hard to keep hope alive. They put up flyers, visited the animal shelters, and kept Buddy's bed and bowls where they always were, just in case he came back. But as the months passed, they began to accept that Buddy might be gone forever. A year later, on a stormy autumn evening, the Smiths were having dinner when they heard a faint scratching at the front door. At first, they thought it was the wind, but then it came again, more insistent. Mr. Smith opened the door, and there, standing in the rain, was Buddy. His once golden fur was matted and dirty, and he looked thinner, but it was unmistakably him. The family was overjoyed. They pulled Buddy inside, wrapping him in towels and hugging him tightly. Emily and Jake couldn't stop petting him, and even Mrs. Smith, who was usually calm and composed, wiped away tears of happiness. They gave Buddy a warm bath, fed him his favorite meal, and let him sleep in his old spot by the fireplace. It felt like a miracle. But as the days went by, the Smiths started to notice that something was different about Buddy. He no longer wagged his tail when they called his name, and he didn't seem interested in playing with his toys. Instead, he would sit for hours, staring at nothing, his eyes dark and distant. When they tried to pet him, his fur felt cold and rough, not the soft, warm coat they remembered. One night, Jake woke up to the sound of growling. He looked over to see Buddy standing in the doorway of his room, his eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The dog's lips were curled back, revealing sharp teeth, and his growl was low and menacing. Jake froze in fear, unable to move. Buddy slowly turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. The next morning, Jake told his parents what had happened, but they brushed it off, thinking it was just a bad dream. However, strange things continued to happen. The temperature in the house would drop suddenly, and they would hear strange noises at night, whispers, footsteps, and the sound of something scratching at the walls. Objects would move on their own, lights would flicker, and once, they found a picture frame containing a family photo smashed on the floor, the glass shattered and the image torn. Mrs. Smith began to notice claw marks on the furniture and walls, deep gouges that hadn't been there before. When she looked closely at Buddy, she saw that his once bright eyes now held a strange, malevolent glint, and his shadow seemed larger, darker, as if it didn't quite belong to him. Desperate and scared, the Smiths sought help from Father O'Malley, the local priest. When Father O'Malley arrived at their home, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. The air in the house was thick with a heavy, oppressive energy, and he could feel a chill that seemed to come from within the walls themselves. Father O'Malley gathered the family in the living room and began to bless the house. As he sprinkled holy water and recited prayers, Buddy appeared at the doorway, his fur standing on end, his eyes glowing a deep, unnatural red. The dog's growls grew louder, more guttural, as if something dark and ancient was using Buddy's body as a vessel. The priest continued his prayers, his voice steady, despite the fear that gripped the family. Buddy began to tremble, his body convulsing as if he was fighting something inside him. Suddenly, with a final, blood-curdling howl, Buddy turned and bolted out the door, disappearing into the stormy night. The Smiths ran to the door, but Buddy was gone. The night was silent except for the rain and the distant rumble of thunder. The house, once so warm and inviting, felt eerily quiet. The strange occurrences stopped after that night, but the Smiths were left with an uneasy feeling that lingered in the corners of their minds. They never saw Buddy again. The love they had for him remained, but it was now mixed with a deep sadness and fear. They couldn't shake the feeling that the dog who had returned to them wasn't really Buddy, but something else, something dark and dangerous that had worn his form like a mask. Years later, when the children were grown and had families of their own, they would still talk about Buddy, the beloved dog who had brought so much joy into their lives. But they would also remember the shadow that had fallen over their home when he returned, and the way his eyes had glowed in the dark, as if something far more sinister than a lost pet had come back to them that stormy night.